Good morning. Welcome to a live broadcast on Tennessean.com. I'm David Plazas, the Opinion Engagement Editor. Today is one of our mayoral interviews with candidate Charles Robert Bone. We're delighted to have you here, and we have our editorial board members here, President and Publisher Laura Hollingsworth, Executive Editor Stephanie Murray, News Director Maria DeVarine, and Metro columnist Frank Daniels III. Welcome, Mr. Bone. We appreciate your time here.
Yes,
we're going to have hopefully a lively conversation about a variety of issues. One of the things that you often talk about in your commercials is Nashville for everybody, Nashville for all. I've seen the flyers, I've seen the commercials. What does that mean exactly, especially for voters who are just getting into the election, trying to make their decision soon? Explain that for us.
I think it means a couple of things. What got me into this race was two things. One is affirmatively wanting to see us keep the momentum of the city going. But the second piece of that, to realize that momentum, all that economic opportunity and prosperity had not reached every family, every neighborhood, and every community. So I think it means as we kind of turn the page and we get a new scorecard for what the next 4 or 8 years looks like, I think it means a little less on the capital projects. We're not likely to do another $1 billion worth of investment in downtown Nashville over the next 4 or 8 years. May not do it again in my lifetime. But I think we will have the ability to invest in neighborhoods, to invest in our communities, to invest in education, transit, and infrastructure. And I think we have to do a better job of, as we turn that page, pushing that investment further into the city, further into the county, but also showing people how they benefit from the investments that have been made.
Could you specifically go into how you fund those things and what ideas you have specifically for those neighborhood projects?
Sure. And so let's take the funding piece of that. I hear all the time, well, we want government to run like a business. And in many respects, that's true if you're talking about bringing disciplines and efficiencies from the business world. Where that conversation gets hard is the government gets the no economies of scale, right? The more people that move here, generally the more it costs to provide those services. In my neighborhood, the city will take in about $1 worth of revenue for $1 worth of expenses. So I think then we have the opportunity to think, so where can we think proprietary? And regardless of whether people agree with how we've gotten to where we are, we now have this suite of investments and proprietary assets from the convention center to the baseball stadium to the amphitheater to the Country Music Hall of Fame. It includes Opryland, it includes Fontanelle and the Zoo and the Hermitage that are attracting people to this city all day, every day. I mean, just since the idea of this campaign began, we've gone from hosting 11 million visitors on an annual basis to 12 million visitors. Is that somebody else joining us?
No, that's you, I'm sorry.
12 million visitors to now to 13 million visitors. We will attract this year, we attracted last year, 20 visitors for every one of us that lives here. And if you paid any attention or were where we sit for the SEC basketball tournament, the NRA convention, CMA Music Fest, the 4th of July, we know this year will be well up over that. And visitor spending has gone from $4.6 billion to $5 billion, now to $5.4 billion. I think where we're headed, if we continue to kind of keep our foot on the gas, is not 13 million visitors, but 15, 16, 17 million visitors that aren't spending $5 billion, but are spending $8 billion. The sales tax growth on that doesn't just go to the state, doesn't go back to just pay convention center, sports authority bonds. At a minimum, 2.25% of that goes to the general fund, half of which has to be spent on education. So this year, the budget that was just voted on by the Metro Council, despite all the cranes you can see from the windows of the Tennessean, we only had $6 million worth of property tax growth, but we had $36 million worth of sales tax growth. And I'm convinced that a large part of that is coming from those who are visiting the city, from out of the county, from out of the region, and now even out of the country. So this year we'll collect about $360 million worth of sales tax. I'd like to call the base at 360. And as 360 becomes 375 million, 400 million, 500, 600 million, to show people where and how that money's being reinvested. So the next time we lay a mile's worth of sidewalks on Lebanon Road in Donaldson or on Hillsborough Road in Green Hills, which we're doing right now, or we build a new community center in Madison or a new park in the southeast part of town, or we invest in an ELL program through the schools, or we increase teacher pay or do something different, or allow some of our debt to get paid down early. I want to show you where that money's being reinvested, because at the end of the day, if you live in Madison, you should have just as much at stake in the vibrancy and the vitality of downtown as those of us who live and work and play in downtown Nashville. And so those specific priorities, I want to go community by community, right? And at the end of the day, while I've got some ideas in each of those places, at the end of the day, I want the community to tell us what needs to be done. I mean, since we said Madison, take Madison as an example. The heritage, the brand, the economic development opportunities and the infrastructure needs of Madison look completely different than Donaldson, which is 8 miles to the south, and completely different than Goldsville, which is 6 miles to the north. And to come back and develop a real infrastructure and an economic development plan for each of those communities that takes advantage of the opportunities that they already have in place, but also funds the needs that are there going forward. I mean, for example, Madison has one thing that no other community has, Ellington Parkway. We can get from right here to the heart of Madison in 14 minutes in the highest traffic time of the day. That ought to be part of our economic development strategy. When we talk about other folks moving to the city or corporate expansions, what's happening right there at Due West, just as an example, is perfect. I didn't mean to go. You got me wound up on that one. I got myself wound up on that.
No, that's all right.
So it sounds like from what you described, we've seen a lot of success just in the 3 years I've been here in revitalizing the Antioch area.
Yep.
It sounds like you would replicate some of that neighborhood by neighborhood. Talk to us a little bit more about, would there be private-public partnerships? How would you go beyond the current funding mechanism for transportation, some of the larger projects that need to get done, sewer and water?
Yeah, and that's a great question. I mean, what I like about what they've done in Antioch, two pieces of that specifically. One, the CNAP group, and they were able to get themselves organized and to play to their strengths. They played to their demographic strengths, and they played to where they are geographically sitting on that I-24 corridor, then which made it easy for the city to come along. Now, the city didn't just choose Antioch. You know, they were there, Nashville State didn't just wake up and think we ought to be in Antioch. Antioch went and recruited them to Antioch. But I think what the city has done there is a great model, and it's where can we invest $1 worth of public money and hope over time that we attract $15 or $20 or $25 worth of private investment. Where can we lay that groundwork? You've seen it happen in 12 South and other places where the government doesn't have to have just a short-term view. Right? We can take the long-term view of this and say, where can we make those strategic investments? To your question, where does the money come from in that? We're going to continue to expand our property tax base, and we're going to continue to expand our sales tax base. There's never going to be enough revenue to do everything we want, but I think we have to think strategically. We have to think proprietary in terms of what assets can we leverage. But when you consider that 2/3 of our long-term debt is scheduled to be paid off in the next 10 years, I think that's going to give us this unique opportunity not only to continue to bring down some of our debt, but also to continue to make strategic investments. It's just as we turn that page, I think we begin to recalibrate those priorities. And just as we were thought outside the box in terms of how we did some stuff downtown and the creativity that we applied to some of that, I think we can do in other parts of the city and other parts of the county. We're going to have the ability to make those strategic investments. Now, transit, to your question, gets a little more difficult, right? Because there is a real regional aspect of this, and we can't lose sight of the regional aspect of that. I give Mayor Dean a tremendous amount of credit for putting the Mayor's Regional Caucus together. And as you all have seen and you all have sit in, and I know it's an issue you all pay close attention to, I don't think we're starting from ground zero. I think a lot of work has been done with the leadership in the region over the last couple of years that the next mayor is going to get the benefit of. Now, the funding piece of that, dedicated funding, I mean, that has to be answered. We're going to have to have the state as a partner in that ultimately and get everybody on the same page the way that works. But in Nashville, we can't afford just to say, well, we're going to hold back until we have the regional piece of this worked out. I think we have to be doing the work on what's happening here with MTA, what's happening here with local transit, but planning that out, thinking how do we connect that ultimately into a regional plan.
When you think about transit and you think about Nashville's role in that regional planning structure and thinking process, in your mind, what are the top 3 priorities in as much specificity as you can imagine in dealing with that? What are the first sort of 3 things that you think you got to tackle as mayor on transit?
So as I think about that broadly, I think the next mayor is going to have the benefit of 3 things that are already working, that are already in place. The first is the new MTA strategic plan. And I think that MTA strategic plan, as I hope, will, one, focus on some short-term efficiencies, both from an app and how we synchronize our lights and how we look at the way we redo routes and where should we ride buses, where should we add capacity. But we'll also break this down, I hope, on a corridor-by-corridor basis. We know Charlotte, one street over from where we are, is going to look a lot different than Nolensville Road. Nolensville Road has 4 of the 17 busiest intersections in the city, which looks different than Murfreesboro Road. I think there's a different approach for a lot of those corridors. Some of those, it will look like BRT. Some of those I think will look like BRT light, and some of those I think will be BRT with a dedicated lane, which you could see on Nolensville Road. But I think it will be in a community where the groundwork has been laid, where people will say, yes, that's what we want and need. I think the second piece of that is the Mayor's Regional Caucus, and beginning to take it. When you sit in on those Mayor's Regional Caucus meetings, it's not unanimous, but there's a lot of consensus about a 15, 20-year plan and how they work with the state. The last one I sat in, they had invited all the state legislators from each of those counties so that they could hear from the mayors and the leadership about what needed to happen. But the third piece of that, I think, is what you're beginning to see at the state level. I mean, the very state senators that I think were responsible for putting the final nail in the AMP coffin are now the ones advocating, well, maybe we ought to do light rail coming from Murfreesboro. Maybe we ought to do light rail coming from Clarksville. We know this is not an issue we can pave our way out of, with all due respect. I don't think it's an issue we can synchronize our lights out of, right? I mean, we're going to have to bring some short-term efficiencies. But the only way we address this is we got to reduce demand. And the only way to reduce demand is we got to pick up choice riders. We got to pick up people who have another option. And as I've said this a couple times, as I've been trying to ride the bus from where I live in West Nashville, riding the bus is the easy part. I think I recognize different people have different perspectives of where they get in and whether they have to make a crosstown connection or whether they have to come downtown. But my experience showed me that riding the bus was the easy part. Getting to it was the hard part. But I think the next mayor's going to get the benefit of all of those things moving simultaneously. This is not going to happen overnight. We know that. But we've got to make some significant progress, I think, in all of those areas.
And do you have some thoughts about what kinds of funding mechanisms you would advocate?
Well, so for just the MTA piece of that, I mean, obviously we've continued to be able to fund what we're doing. That is in my mind, that is a real priority, because when you think about congestion, you think about the fact that we'll have 10 million rides on MTA this year, but we're only at 15% capacity. I think there is an opportunity to continue to fund MTA, to continue to fund more routes, more crosstown connections, and make this as efficient and as dependable as we possibly can, because I think we probably get a bigger return on our investment for that than expanding roads and widening what we're doing. On the regional piece of that, I mean, dedicated funding is there, right? And so you hear a lot of conversation about the gas tax. I think the governor's probably more optimistic on that than the Speaker of the House, just based on the conversations that I've been privy to. But I think if you could get the gasoline tax in place, whether at the federal level or the state level, I think there's an opportunity for the region to piggyback on that. If not, it's going to have to be some type of user fee, meaning, you know, your car tags, or the money's not going to fall out of the sky. And we know that this is not just long-term, not just $1 billion issue. This is a multi-billion-dollar issue, but it's going to be over a period of time, and it has to be funded regionally. I mean, we can't do this without the other counties, but this is not going to happen without us. And I think we got to continue to take that leadership role, but also be cognizant of the fact that we can't just do this on our own. It's going to require some type of help at the state ultimately.
And to continue to talk about transit, the Nashville Next Plan has recommended solutions from anywhere from $1 billion to $7 billion. Do you have a specific kind of a wish list of where you'd like to see Nashville taken, and based upon the resources we have, what can we actually do?
Yeah, I mean, I'd be hesitant to kind of break it down community by community and how we put some hierarchy there. We've seen just some of the recent statistics that show where we're getting the most congestion and where it's taken the longest and what corridors they are. I mean, I saw just this morning that just on that I-24 corridor coming in from Rutherford County, cars have gone up 51% in the last 10 years. I mean, that's staggering to think of, and it fits nicely with the mindset that we're going to go from 1.8 million people in the region to 3.1 million people over the next 20 years. So I guess I would be looking not just to the Nashville Next Plan, also to the MPO and the MTA, but I think it's the same conversation about sidewalks. Where can we get our biggest connectivity? Where can we get our biggest return on investment? And where is there accessibility? And I think, you know, at the end of the day, the conversation about mass transit can't be limited to just congestion. I think we also have to talk about that this is about access. It's about mobility, but it's about access. And how do you get somebody from North Nashville to Donaldson? How do you get somebody from Antioch to Creve Hall?
I know we've talked about issues of debt, for example. You know, the Nashville budget, 10.9% of it is dedicated to debt service. Mm-hmm. Is that something that you're comfortable with? What would be your thoughts in terms of addressing that?
I think we all would like to have less debt. Certainly I would, given our current debt load. At the same time, I can't point to any one thing that's been done over the last 10 years and say, well, you know, I wouldn't have done that, and therefore that would have made some big difference. The way I calculate that number is closer to 10.5% than 10.9, but I think it's certainly right there within that range. But if you look at a snapshot going back 10 years ago, that was a number that was about 11.25% in terms of total debt service to budget. I'd like to see us drop that down into single digits during the next mayoral administration. At the same time, the fact that 2/3 of our debt does get paid off in 10 years, I think gives us a good opportunity. It gives us a good opportunity to have this conversation of where is the balance, what is the debt load that we're comfortable with, what can we comfortably service, how are we protected against whenever the next downturn comes, when it comes, but then also where are those strategic investments? And as we prioritize education and transit and infrastructure, I mean, as important as the transit conversation, we've got $1.2 billion in unfunded maintenance and new construction needs with the schools, right? And what this administration has done, which I applaud, is they've been getting them as much as they can every year, 125 or 135 or 150 million dollars. And the school system has this great prioritized list, and so they take however much they get and they see how far down that list that gets them, and then those next projects raise up. But we're never going to get ahead of that curve by just doing $100 million a year. And I'm not advocating for some huge expansion, but we're going to have a pretty serious conversation going forward of what are those infrastructure priorities going forward, and what role do schools play in that, because we're going to have a more ambitious school maintenance and school construction program than we have now.
You touched briefly on schools, so let's switch gears over to that topic. We know the board today is starting to interview the finalists. There was also some concern about the interim selection and then reselection. So can you share with us your thoughts about that and about the current pool of candidates?
Yeah, my concern, and this concern goes back a year, but has really manifested itself in the last couple of weeks, especially with the interim director search or the interim director and then the replacement of that. My concern has been that the political environment, particularly around education, I didn't think was stable enough to go attract a high quality, high caliber deep pool of potential candidates. And I had the opportunity to meet with the search firm once, which was great, but I left with the concern, and I don't want to prejudge this, and I'll say the 4 people that they put out there, to be honest, as busy as I've been, I don't know anything other than what I'm reading in the Tennessean for the most part. So I don't want to prejudge that pool. I know they're interviewing today, but I think I was expecting and hoping for a more deeper pool, especially at a time, I mean, just think about the way this room is represented, at a time when we're able to attract amazing talent to Nashville. We'll be able to do the same thing with the school system, and not just at the very top, but throughout the school system. And so my concern was, if I was a school director or in the education field and was looking at applying at this job, I would want to know who the next mayor is. And I recognize that the mayor and the school director don't report to each other, but they have to be partners. Whoever they are going forward have to be partners, because ultimately we report to the exact same people, right? We report to the taxpayer, we report to our students, we report to our families. And so my concern was, I had a lot of hesitancy over the last year. At the same time, I don't want to bully the school board. That's their role, and I'm just a candidate. I'm not even the mayor, right? I'm just a candidate. So I wanted to be careful about my opinions, and I thought the proof would be in the pudding when they announced those 4. And I thought, and again, I don't know any of the 4, have not met a one of them to my knowledge, but I was hoping for a deeper pool, and I think that probably shows that it's probably maybe time to step back and reevaluate.
How would you address any of that if you were to win the election in early August?
Sure. Well, so I think we're headed for a runoff, so I think it'll probably be September the 10th. I'm sorry, I'm supposed to say I'm going to win without a runoff. I will get 50% of the vote. Hypothetically, if there were a runoff come September, I think I think that really kind of goes to what is the mayor's role in education. And I think the mayor has a couple of different places. One is the mayor has the unique position to set the tone, to set the expectations of the education conversation in the city. And certainly the mayor has the ability to hold the school board and the school director accountable from time to time. But I think the mayor has the pulpit in which he or she can speak about, these are our expectations as a city. 2, I view my role, going back a little bit, is how can I partner with the school system? I want to be their first phone call when they need help on something, either community help or they need help thinking through something. And I understand the legal separation there, but I want to be their partner. I want to be that first phone call. But 3, You know, the school system, the teachers and the principals get to work from the inside of that school out, but they only have those kids 8 hours a day, 180 days a year. That's 20% of a child's life. If we're serious about education in this city, if we're serious about our children, right, we have to focus on that other 80% as well, which I think is a great opportunity for the mayor to lead the community to say, what are we doing about after school? What are we doing about out of school program? Because we know in our own individual experiences, what's happening in that other 80% of a child's life has just as much impact on what's happening in the classroom. And we can't leave this as the exclusive responsibility of that teacher, of that principal, the school board, of the school system. We've got some great after and out of school programming in this city, but when you really look at it, when you inventory that, we're probably providing effective after or out of school programming to maybe 8% of the kids. I think that's the charge for the next mayor, is to bring the community together and say, look, and it doesn't have to be government programs. Right? I mean, NASA is a perfect example, but NASA partners with churches, it partners with other nonprofits. You've got Big Brothers Big Sisters, Boys and Girls Club, Martha O'Brien, Oasis Center. We could name 24 organizations that are doing really great work with children, that are doing really great work with families. And my question for all of them has been, could you serve more kids with more resources? And if yes is the answer, which invariably it is, that's on us. Now, could we do a better job with community enhancement grants? Probably. But it's also on us to talk about that in a way so that people understand these after out of school programs, or these nonprofits, or even these church programs are supporting the mission of the school system and the mission of the city, and that they're totally aligned. What I love about Carl Dean is he'll show up at a Big Brothers Big Sisters breakfast and say, this is a great organization. I volunteer my time. I give my money, and at the end of this breakfast, somebody's going to ask you for money, and you should too. But what nobody's ever able to do is take that to the next step and say, you ought to support Big Brothers Big Sisters because they're aligned with the school system. They're doing the work of the city. And you get the double benefit of not only helping a great organization, but you get the benefit of moving the needle in the city.
To that end, can you share with us your thoughts about pre-K?
Sure. Well, Can I back it up and take the longer route to how I get to pre-K? Since I don't have 60 seconds, how would you solve mass transit? You have 60 seconds. The clock is running. Last year, when all the TCAP scores came out, there was an effective presentation done that talked about how we compared to Memphis and Knoxville, or Chattanooga. And as I sat there, I began to have two thoughts. One is we're not competing against Memphis and Knoxville any longer. We're competing against Austin and Charlotte and pick the competitive peer city. But two, all that is a means to what end, right? And the education system, this can't be about scores just for the sake of scores. This has to be about making sure that we provide a quality education to every child because I believe that's a right. Two, it has to be ensuring that our school system is meeting the demands of the workforce of today and the workforce of tomorrow. Three, it has to be helping kids who are middle class do as well as their parents were and keep them on that track. But fourth, most importantly, which 73% of our kids qualify for free and reduced lunch. We got 73% of our kids living in poverty, 2,900 of which may be homeless. Right? This has, first and foremost, this has to be a ticket out of poverty. So, and I'm not a sociologist and I'm not an educator by training, but when I kind of pull back the covers on that, and I get accused of using too many statistics, but when you look at the statistical analysis, the best way to get a child out of poverty is for them to graduate from a 2-year or a 4-year college or to have some post-training from high school. Right? The best way to make that happen is you got to graduate from high school and you got to do well in the ACT. Well, to do well in the ACT, you got to put those building blocks in place in 9th grade or 10th grade. Well, in order to do that, we got to be focused on 3rd grade literacy levels because we know based on your 3rd grade literacy level, we can predict how well you're going to do in the ACT score. Well, then what's scary is we know 3rd grade literacy levels are based on what happens before a child ever steps foot in that kindergarten classroom. And so, yeah, pre-K programs, absolutely. And there is a question about how we fund it, right? This has to be a serious conversation about priorities. But if we say as a city, we are focused on ending cycles and generations of poverty, and we're focused on raising ACT scores from 18.3 to 19.5 or whatever the right number is, my church and your nonprofit and the Tennessean needs to understand why that's important. It's important not just because we want to raise ACT scores and say we're better than Atlanta or Austin. It's important because we want to get a kid to college. And then that drives the pre-K conversation because you can't just start this when a kid is 16 years old. And so am I in favor of universal pre-K? The answer is absolutely. Do I know how we would fund that as I sit here today? Absolutely not. But I do know we're going to have the ability to invest in other programs, and I think that has to be at the top of the list, as well as how we expand our after and out of school programmings, as well as the kids. I mentioned this at the Tennessean debate. We've got 7,000 kids in 9th grade last year and 4,000 kids in 12th grade. Your paper wrote about it just this week, this lost generation. Right? We got 3,000 kids in 3 years that fell out of the system. Right? And they're not coming to intern at my law firm. They're not coming to work here at the Tennessean. They are out of the system. And so I'd like to see us, in addition to pre-K, I'd like to see us do a huge summer jobs and internship program and try to attack 500 kids, 1,000 kids. I said attract 500 or 1,000 kids, right, and go business to business. The government can take some of these, the city can, the Tennessean can take 1 or 2 kids, and it has to be a pathway. They'll come with a letter of recommendation, but those kids that are 14 to 21, that's where we're losing. And so I would come at it from both ends of the spectrum, and that was not necessarily your question, but yes, pre-K, but it can't be just in the vacuum of pre-K. Sorry. I love not having 60 seconds.
Do you have an idea of who would be on your team should you be elected mayor? Would you share that?
Those are 2 different questions. Yes is the first one. Here's where I've given a lot of thought as to how I would organize the mayor's office. And I think given the growth of the city, I think this is too big for one deputy mayor. And you take our departments and agencies. We've got 53 different departments and agencies now in Metro. I think not our Metro system, but the way it's set up is, I think, to respond to issues and priorities and constituencies of 25 years ago. And we add a new office like the mayor's office, New Americans. We figure out, all right, where do we just latch it on to the org chart? Where does it need to be housed? I'd like to see us come back and break it up and have 3 or 4 different deputy mayors without necessarily expanding the size of the mayor's office, but bring in 3 or 4 folks and have one person focused on all the issues we talked, education and children and family issues, one person focused on transportation, one focused on economic development and tourism, and one focused maybe on public safety. Now, we could divide those up in different ways, and somebody smarter than I am could help figure that out, and then begin to line up our departments and agencies to say, which departments and agencies impact education and children and family issues, which ones are involved in transportation, and then you have a real clear channel. Mm-hmm. I do have an idea of the types of people I would want in that role. I'd want it to be, clearly if you look at my law firm, very interested in diversity. I think that's important. I think we have to look like the community we serve. I'd like there to be a blend of seasoned people who are a lot older and a lot more savvy and a lot more experienced than I am, but at the same time we got to figure out how we get some of these younger folks in, and how we get not just millennials but the young professionals, and how we get them on different boards and agencies. I spoke the other night to a young chamber event and asked how many people here has ever served in a Metro board or agency. Nobody, right? And that's what's frustrating me all the time. We say, well, we want to get younger people involved, and then take the governor's office or take the mayor, but then we don't put anybody on. We don't give them a chance to serve. And I've got some ideas for sure of the types of people I'd like in those roles, and I've got some ideas as the names. But with all due respect, some of those people are currently running for office. Some of those people work for people who are running for office, and I don't think it would be appropriate. I've promised a job to no one, only to myself, But I think it would be inappropriate at this point, one, to start offering jobs to people. I think there's some legal issues with that. I think there's some other implications with that. So, but we can't just wait till the end of September to think of it. The next mayor's going to take office before the fall is out. And you're going to have the runoff September 10th, and if it holds like it was 8 years ago, the next mayor will be in office before the end of September. So this is stuff we have to give thought to, but I think I would be prepared to be a lot more specific about that in the runoff. Certainly then you have 2 candidates as opposed to 7 candidates. I want to be respectful of everybody running.
And as you think about that and you assess what your strengths and weaknesses are, what weaknesses are you would you be looking to supplement in the folks that you bring to work with you?
Yeah, that's a great question. Certainly, I'm 41 years old. I think I've got a unique blend of business and government experience, but there are people who have far more experience than I have, both in the business sector and in the government sector. It is, we're getting to see a huge turnover with the council. I think having people there who have an institutional memory that understand the way things were done 20 or 25 years ago, it may no longer be applicable, but it's an important part of the conversation for somebody to stand up and say, well, we did do it this way because. And I think we have to have folks that look like the rest of the city, right? I think we have to have people that come not just from all walks of life, but have different viewpoints at that table. And where I would like to go is to open that table up a lot larger, right? And I think I mentioned this yesterday at the forum you moderated. We've got the world's greatest nonprofit community in Nashville, some of which we touched on. We've got 2,000 nonprofits that have an aggregate budget of $9.4 billion. Our nonprofit community is 5 times the size of the metro government. We have a colleges and university system with leadership that's not apathetic about the future of Nashville. We have 700 churches literally asking, what can we do to help? I think the business community is there. I think we have to open up that table and get a lot. Every issue we talk about this morning, we already have the resources, the ingenuity, and the talent here to tackle those. It's just a matter of getting everybody on the same page and getting people aligned with common outcomes, common objectives, and the path to get there. And so I would look to bring in people. I like where I am from the experience and from the perspective, and then I've got kind of a citywide perspective, but certainly bringing in folks that have a lot more experience than I am, absolutely.
Well, let's take that a little further, because you mentioned that people call you out for being the statistics guy.
Somebody referred to me as Rain Man on Twitter. My wife says I think in spreadsheets.
Well, and that's part of getting to know you here. I think this is a good opportunity past 60 seconds, because you do come off very knowledgeable about all these pieces and all these stats, and indicate a very deep knowledge in all of these areas. So how did you prepare yourself like that? How do you know these things? What experience do you have at 41 that allows you to rail those things off and
Sure.
be that Rain Man?
Rain Man thing. This is going to stick now,
This is gonna
right?
stick.
And now I'm going to be everybody. I love how Howard in these debates says, "Well, Charles Howard knows all the statistics, so I don't have to get into those." Like, I mean, all right, this now falls to my responsibility. I think when you take each issue, like when you talk, it's the same thing back on education. If we're going to move the needle, we have to define not only is it how we move the needle, but where we are. Right? I mean, I can't imagine trying to talk about education or transit or infrastructure or affordable housing or poverty or our diverse communities without knowing exactly where we are. And there's this great book that Stephen Goldsmith, who was the deputy mayor under Mayor Bloomberg and used to be the mayor of Indianapolis, wrote. And it's about how you use data, how you use statistics, how you engage with people with technology. This may be bolder than some people would want to be. I'd like to put a lot of those statistics on our website and say, as a city, as we bring those groups to the table, let's talk about what are the outcomes we want in education. And not just to say, yeah, we want more kids to graduate. Let's talk specifically and let people be, and one, I don't want the exclusive responsibility of articulating that goal, right? I want that to be a community goal, and I'm willing to compromise on what that needs to be. If left to my own devices, sure, I think ACT scores is important. Somebody might convince me there's a different one. But I think we have to know where we are and where we're headed, and people have to see that in real time so that you all know.
Just a lot of self-study that you've done.
I'm sorry, to your question. So, yeah, it's self-study, but it's also being out and talking to people and visiting with people. I spent the morning yesterday at the Mission literally trying to understand. So if we're going to talk about moving the needle on homelessness, how do we do it? Like, what do we need? What needs to be measured? Because I think everybody would agree that's an important issue. And it's an important issue for where we are, but we just can't say, and we can't leave this just to the Homeless Commission, but we have to tell people, we have to tell my church, here's how you can help, right? My church can't sign up to end homelessness in Nashville, but they might be able to partner with one other church or one other organization or a business or a school to get one family off the streets.
Mm-hmm. So a couple more just to dive a little bit more into you. One of the questions I have is, so a lot of folks can point to rhetoric and then point to achievement and having done. What are you most proud of having accomplished in your realm of where you've been so far?
Sure.
What achievements have you had?
I think about our law firm, and I'm heavily involved with the management there. We've got, 40 or 41 different partners and lawyers, and everybody's a member, which requires not to lead necessarily as a CEO, but you got to find consensus every day amongst that group. As we joke, we think like 37 or 38 of our lawyers are happy, but it's a different 37 or 38 every day, right? So you're always looking for where can you find consensus and how can you do that? And in my law practice, it's the same thing. It's whether it's litigation in a lawsuit, trying to find common ground or middle ground to get something resolved, or it's in a deal or a transaction, trying to find where's the consensus, where can we find compromise. Peel that back, I think about what I've been able to do on the business side. I've been involved with a lot of restaurants, a lot of startups, a bass boat company, manufacturing company, technology, healthcare, et cetera. And I'm proud that I know what it takes to start and run a small business. And I know that's not easy, and I know we can't take that for granted. At the same time, the opportunity to serve as general counsel for the Music City Center gave me an insight into the business business in metro government that I'm not sure anybody else has. That's right, and I like all these other people, and I respect their role, I respect their experiences, but at the end of the day, I think I have a combination of real hands-on business experience and relevant experience with the metro government, and I'm incredibly proud of both of those.
You know, there's been some readers who said, hey, some of his ownership in these other businesses, et cetera, aren't there conflicts of interest in some of those ownerships should he become mayor? How would you address that?
Well, so everything I have will be absolutely, I tried to give you all a list of every investment. I want everything I know disclosed, and we'll take those on a one-by-one basis. I mean, I think I've got some small real estate holdings that are even out of state. I'm not sure that that presents a conflict of interest. Bass Boat Company, if the restaurants do, then certainly I will step back from them. I will put those in a trust. I will not have anything that is perceived as a conflict of interest. That's not why I'm running. I'm not running to help myself. Our law firm has said we won't do business in front of the city. We won't do business representing the city. So I want to be very clear that I will disentangle myself from any conflict that I have.
Charles, why are you running?
You know,
Really, like why you also now? Why are you the best person? Why is Charles Roberts?
so as I disclosed earlier, I like everybody running. I know them. Some I know better than others. I've now, over the last 6 months, spent more time with them than I have my own family. But as I had conversations with some of them going back 18 months ago, and others who talked about running and didn't, and others that were wanting to influence that process, what I thought I heard was a combination of two things. One is, oh, well, Nashville's had a great run the last 5 or 10 years. Now's the time to step back and take a deep breath. I couldn't sign up for that. I mean, I understand that we have to do this in the most physically responsible way possible. I understand that this is not growth at any cost, and we have to be thoughtful about growth. I understand their concerns about debt. But I left all those conversations, and those were not for the purposes of me thinking, well, gosh, I guess I'm going to run. I guess that thought was in the back of my mind, and it wasn't them necessarily trying to convince me to be for them. But I left all those conversations scratching my head saying, I can't sign up for that. I affirmatively want to see the next mayor stand up and say, we're going to be bold enough to sustain this momentum. But there's also that huge misunderstanding that I think is out there that seems to think that Nashville is a pretty small place and that exists between here and West Nashville and Green Hills, and all the prosperity there is being felt all over the city and all over the county. Right? You go 2 miles from where we sit to North Nashville, or you go 4 or 5 miles out Nolensville Road, you feel like you're 50 or 60 miles away from the city. Or you spend time in Donaldson or Madison or Bellevue or Antioch, and what they say is, Nashville's great, right? We think it's headed in the right direction, but we see all this enormous investment and attention going into downtown. Either how do we benefit from that, or when is our turn? And I think the next mayor has to stand up and say, we're going to be bold enough to sustain that momentum, but responsible enough to diversify that prosperity and to show you, as we talked earlier, as that sales tax growth, to show you how that's being reinvested in the neighborhood. And that's what I wanted to hear from somebody, and I didn't hear it. And that's what I passionately believe is needed from the next mayor as we turn that page and as we recalibrate our priorities.
So as you look at the current polls, and I don't know if you have plans for one coming, or but
You all have to know, right? I mean,
how do you feel about your position now? Where do you think you are? How is your brand being positioned right now, and how are people perceiving you? What's your strategy?
So we love where we are. We look at 3 types of data on a pretty regular basis. One, we have, we made yesterday about 2,400 phone calls, and we rate all those phone calls on a 1 to 5. 1 being absolutely for us, 3 undecided, 5 against us, 2 and 4 somewhere in between. So we see what that data is. We look at the top 40 that now we've expanded to 60 precincts where we think make up the vast majority of the electorate. So I get real time. It's the first thing I look at every morning is a graph of where you are, the calls made yesterday, as well as doors that were knocked. We know exactly what's happening in those precincts. We know exactly where we are and feel really good about where we are. The second thing is we have the ability to go out and track on a nightly basis and ask one question. Right? And this is not, if you knew this about this candidate, would it change your vote? We look exactly where that is. We've done it this week, and it shows you got 5 candidates within 6 points of each other. This is shrinking, and it's incredibly close, and we're right in the middle of that. It comes back and shows us third, and then we've got the ability to go out and do longer polls that we have not felt until now the need to share with anybody because we think that's proprietary to us. It shows us this. We know this is an incredibly hard race to poll, not only because you have 7 candidates, also because it's nonpartisan, but also if you want to game a poll, or intentionally or unintentionally, it's all about your turnout assumptions, right? And this race doesn't get decided in West Nashville and Green Hills. I think I'll do okay there. But you got to be careful to make sure you're getting a broad swath of the community and that you're looking at Goldsville and Madison and Donaldson. What we see happening on the ground, we know. So we love where we are. I don't want to be overconfident. We got a lot more work to do over the next 27 and a half days, but we love where we are. And I'm looking at all that data as I'm not only investing my own money, obviously I'm asking other people to invest in what we're doing. So the first time you see that I've stopped investing in my campaign will know that you don't think that I no longer have a chance to win. We know exactly where we are and we feel perfect about it.
You talked about all of Nashville, the neighborhoods and so forth. I want to come to some of the decisions, some of the failures actually the last couple of months, the AMP, the flood protection system, the jail, the police headquarters. How would you have approached that differently, and how would you approach future projects like that?
Yeah, I think the common thread amongst all those was there enough community conversation on the front end? AMP had plenty of conversation, but on the back end. And where can you find consensus? And consensus takes a while to build, right? It doesn't come, it doesn't come overnight. You got to get the inputs of lots of people, and lots of people have to have a hand in making that. And it's hard because you got to be a lot more open about it. You got to be a lot more transparent about it, and you got to do it earlier than sometimes you would prefer. And so I think that's kind of the common strand through all those. Take the flood protection system. Right? I was for the flood protection system, particularly the downtown piece of that, because I thought that was the component of a larger flood mitigation plan. And I thought we could articulate that in a way to say, we have to protect downtown, but this is just one piece of it. But our investment in downtown is what's going to allow us to invest in your neighborhood. But I was in Goldsville just day before yesterday, right? And people are still talking about the flood wall and are still chapped about that. And I don't blame them, right? Because they didn't understand. Now, I think those who had been a part of that planning process for going back 2 or 3 years thought there had been a lot of conversation. But if there wasn't, and that guy in Goldsville doesn't know that or doesn't understand that, then that's on the mayor, that's on the city to say we got to do a better job. So I think going forward, we have to realize that the mayor and the city, we have to be partners with the Metro Council. We have to be partners with our satellite cities. We have to be partners with our Davidson County delegation. And we have to figure out a way to partner with the legislature. And we have to come back and partner with each of those neighborhoods and open that up so that people feel like their voice was heard. I think that was part of the pushback on the police station, right? People felt like that was a surprise to them, that there was not enough input. There's some lasting, harder feelings there that go back decades. I think that was the piece of it. I think the mayor and the police chief thought what they were proposing was a really good thing and would be well received on Jefferson Street. But as we make public investments, we got to make public investments where people want them. And where it's reflective of saying this is going to help stabilize the neighborhood and help the neighborhood, not destabilize it.
So the flood protection system, the UFPP that started in 2011, 2012, the flood wall protection system that was brought up for the second vote and turned down was very far down the recommendation list in that planning process.
Sure.
So very curious about how you're assessing, you were for that investment as it relates to what we're going to do in other parts of the county when there were many things on that list that were far higher up the priority list of the community engagement that was both local and regional.
Sure, and what I've said is, that has to be in the context of the overall plan, right? And so I think they thought there were some efficiencies and benefits to doing it earlier. Now we get to drop back and go back and look at that priority list. The only way the downtown flood wall is going to work is if people see the benefit to it if they live in Madison or Antioch. And people cannot articulate that today. And so I think two predecessors to that have to happen. First is people have to see that we're doing flood mitigation and flood protection all over the city and have to understand what those priorities are. And two, they have to begin to see the benefit of a vibrant downtown to them. And we're not, what happened a month ago, we're not there yet.
Right.
And I think we have to have those in place before you can advance that.
Well, in that whole process, that plan was done at the same time many people were making business investments in their own flood mitigation processes that it didn't seem to me that plan took into account all those other investments. And would you go back and revisit?
I think we'll revisit it at some point. I don't think coming in at the end of September that'll be the number one thing on the agenda at this point. But I'm not convinced that what happened 5 years ago was a once in 500 or a once in 1,000 year event. I'm convinced that the river is going to act like it's acted the last 100 years, which is we've been at major flood stage 7 times in the last 100 years. I think given current weather patterns, and I'm not here to evangelize on climate change or any of that, but given current weather patterns, I think that's something we have to pay attention to. But it's not going to happen in September, and it's going to happen, I think, further down the road as people begin to see what does flood mitigation look like across the city, and how do we benefit from the investments that have been made in downtown.
So let's think also, flood mitigation is maybe a good place to jump off and think about. There's many more opportunities for regional thought than transit, and maybe
Sure.
transit is the tail that wags the dog, but we look at all the different kinds of utility companies that service this region, the inefficiencies of that, perhaps some of the challenges that came out of looking at the $1 billion or so we need to invest in our water and sewer system over the next 10 years. Is that a regional opportunity that you would look at as a mayor to deal with that?
Would certainly be interested, and you're beginning to see, I mean, just in Goldsville 2 days ago, they have an automatic aid agreement between the Goldsville Fire Department and the Metro Fire Department. And they figure out where can, and, Goldsville is its own satellite city with its own fire department, and they figure out, okay, well, how can Goldsville better serve parts of Metro, and how can Metro better serve parts of Goldsville? And I think that, and we're seeing the same thing now in Brentwood on the Williamson County side. And it's not just fire, but the great thing about the region, right, we're benefiting from having a strong region, and we're benefiting from the fact that people don't really see or respect municipal boundaries. When they think transit, when they think economic development, when they think environmental protections, and when they think utilities, et cetera, they're not cognizant of the fact that they've just gone from Nashville to Brentwood, right? Nobody sees those municipal boundaries. And I think it's an edge that we already have as a city that we're able to think, and for the most part, cooperate regionally, but especially in an environment, back to the original question, how would you pay for this? Every government has to think, how can we be the most efficient we can possibly be? And if there's overlaps there, if there's inefficiencies there, we have to look at it, recognizing that a lot of those utility laws, a lot of that was put in place, 100+ years ago, and we have to be respectful of that, but at the same time, looking for those opportunities of efficiency, just like the automatic aid agreements with our fire departments, absolutely.
What would your top priorities be if you're elected and you head into September in the fourth quarter?
Sure. I think it is, day one is to bring, figuratively day one, to bring all those groups to the table that we talked about earlier and begin to talk about those priorities. I think it's in education, I think it's in transit, and I think it's in infrastructure. And there's a lot more. This race is broader than one issue or a set of 3 issues, but I think those are the 3 we got to figure out every day, where are we moving the needle? And are we improving schools? And if so, how can the mayor help? What's the mayor's role? On transit, are we reducing congestion? Are we increasing access? Are we increasing mobility? And on infrastructure, our population, my guess is our population and demand for services is here and our infrastructure is here. And those are going like that every day. And the opportunity for the next mayor is to bring those back, and with the growth we know is coming, take 2 or 3 steps forward. The scorecard looks different going forward. It doesn't look like big capital projects, I don't think. It looks like that infrastructure. It looks like schools, roads, sewer, water lines, classrooms, et cetera.
How would you address the growth issue from an affordable housing perspective? Are there programs that you've looked at? Are there ideas you want to bring back into Nashville?
I think the great thing is we've now made affordable housing, and if you'd asked me 4 issues, that would have been number 4. That's typically the order I go in when I talk. I think we've done a great job of getting affordable housing on the table. It's something every candidate has to talk about. It comes up in almost every forum, regardless of the topic. There's an affordability question or concern. My frustration is I don't think it's enough just to say that we need 10,000 affordable units. We have to, I think, step back and say affordable housing is for those making anywhere between, true definition, anywhere for those making 30% of area median income to 120%. That's anywhere from $20,000 a year for a family to $75,000, $76,000 a year. Those are completely different housing products. And so I think we've gotten the cart before the horse just a little bit. We know in that toolbox there's a lot of things we can put in that toolbox. We can make sure MDHA is leveraging their resources and doing all they can, particularly with HUD and with the banks and with everything they can from Community Reinvestment Act dollars and what they're talking about Casey Place. It's increasing our commitment to the Barnes Housing Trust and particularly how we encourage and incentivize nonprofit developers. It's looking on for-profit developers and how we use pilots. How we use other types of incentives, because there, I think, is our hook to keep these units affordable, where we can put that in as a deed restriction. And it's also helping people who are in their houses stay in their houses. And we got some great programs already in place, but we need to help scale those so that people aren't vulnerable to losing their house because it's in disrepair, et cetera. But I think before we can load up that toolbox, I think we have to come back and say, these are the types of units we need. We can look at Nashville Next, we can have community conversations and others and say, this is where we'd like to have them. Let's identify that before we say, let's load the toolbox up here. It's one place Mr. Freeman and I disagree on. I don't think we're going to get there by just saying we just need 10,000 units and it doesn't make any difference where they come from, and we're going to get out-of-state apartment developers to come do it. Frankly, that hadn't worked, and I'm not sure that that's ultimately the solution. That may be a piece of it, but that's not the entire part of this. When you look at all the different products that are necessary, and I can't tell you that. I know how we could, back to the data thing, Rain Man, I know how we could figure it out, right? We take our census tracts, we take poverty, we take job growth, we take college degrees. There's different ways to identify all this and then begin to say, let's start with the end in mind and then work backwards, as opposed to the reverse. It's just saying, let's get 10,000 units and we're gonna gauge this on whether we've done 10,000 units or not without any respect for what they need to be.
So there are 3 charter amendments on the ballot this year: one to extend term limits, one to extend term limits by 1 and also reduce the size of the council, right, and then the one requiring metro contracts to have 40% of a Davidson County workforce. Right. How would you vote on those?
So on the charter amendment, on the council size, I'm prepared to work with the council, whether it's 27 members, 40 members, 47 members. And I've heard the arguments on both sides. Does this strengthen the mayor's hand or weaken the mayor's hand? And I'm not sure that I know. Right? I hear both sides of those arguments. I read your article this morning. I'm not sure where I am on that, to be completely honest. I'm undecided. On the term limits, I would increase term limits from 2 to 3 only because I think we need that institutional knowledge. You're getting, for the first time, you're getting ready to see that turnover and that change, and you're no longer going to have Charlie Tigert or Tim Garrett or Ronnie Stein or pick the council member who can stand up and say, well, we did it this way 20 years ago because. So I will vote in favor of that one. The local wage one is the hardest one for me because I don't think we're doing enough around local workforce development. I don't think we're doing enough to connect some of our neighborhoods with the jobs of tomorrow and how we help people retrain for jobs that are there. I think we've got to do something far more ambitious about that. I signed the petition. I want to vote for it. But at the same time, I've heard just in random meetings the last 2 weeks with 2 or 3 developers who say we have projects stalled because we can't get enough workers on them. On the Music City Center, the gauge was workers in the MSA. And I really thought initially that's where that charter amendment was headed, because what I hear loud and clear from the development community is there's not that workforce here. So regardless of if it passes, then I'm going to be laser-like focused on how we can increase our workforce development and increase that capacity in the city. If it doesn't pass, I'm going to do the exact same thing, because I think that is an opportunity it's an opportunity for some of our kids who are falling out of the system, and it's an opportunity for some of those people sitting in neighborhoods where there's high unemployment saying nobody cares about what happens over here.
So how would you vote for it?
Undecided. And I said that to NPR yesterday. I'm struggling.
So yes on 1, undecided on 2, undecided on 3, but you signed the pledge on 3.
I did
right?
sign the pledge.
Okay.
The petition.
The petition.
So Nashville is heading in a great direction according to all the polls that you haven't done.
I didn't say I hadn't done any. I just hadn't shared them.
But in that same Nashville's heading in good direction, you hear very few people saying that there isn't a little angst about that.
No question.
What's the one thing, and you only have 30 seconds to say this one, what's the one thing that if Nashville does not do, that angst will be realized?
I think it's congestion, right? When we're beginning to choke ourselves to death on congestion. And I think the ability with the 10 million passenger rides that we're at 15% capacity, I think as a city, regardless of when we get to the regional piece of this, if we could just take that from 15% to 30%, you'd see an overnight change, right? And I applaud you all for what you're doing your editorial board meetings on the bus and tweeting out about riding the bus, and I've tried to do the same. We have to make this a system that attracts our choice riders, and we have to be able to increase that utilization.
Well, we have about 4 minutes left of the meeting. Are there any other questions?
Where do you see yourself 8 to 12 years from now? Is this a step to another higher office? Is this as far as you want to go in your political career?
So I have no plans beyond this. I just see 4 years. I'm not sure 8 is a given. I just see 4 years. I got into this because I think being mayor is a great job, without question. But again, I wanted to see somebody pursue that vision that said, let's keep the momentum going, but let's diversify it. I have no aspirations for anything else. I'm not taking a pledge that I'd never run for anything else again. I think if you do your current job well, other doors open. But if I had to guess today, in 8 years, I'd be back practicing law where I came from. I got a good gig going.
Any final remarks? Anything that you'd like to add that we haven't asked you, or any would you like to speak to the voters directly?
Sure. Well, I appreciate the opportunity to be here and visit with you all, and the opportunity for this to be live on the internet. I think it's really important that the next mayor understands some of what we've touched on this morning. The importance of business, particularly small business. This isn't just about big business, and this isn't just about being a CEO. This is about how you create jobs, and 70% of our businesses have 9 employees or less, and I don't think the government or the city can take the creation of those jobs for granted. 2, I think it's about having a mayor that fully understands the business of metro government. And having served as general counsel for the Music City Center, I think I have an insight and a window to that, see those complexities, but also understand that they make decisions there all day, every day, that have a tremendous impact on our lives individually, our families, our businesses, our business climate, and quality of life, not just in Nashville, but also in the region. 3, I think I have the ability to see this city through the eyes of my children. I've got 4 children, ages 6 on Monday, 8, 12, 13. If I mess that up, my wife will kill me. But I think I have the ability to see the city through their eyes today, but also, as I said, the community that I want them to be a part of 50 years from now. I think as we turn the page, the scorecard looks different, right? And as I've been saying, our 353 kindergarten teachers have to be just as important as the cranes between here and the riverfront. I think the 40% of our single mothers who live in poverty have to be just as important to the success of Nashville as our CEOs and our bankers and our entrepreneurs. I think repairing our water and sewer lines, some of which are 40 years old, some of which are more than 100 years old, has to be just as important as the success of the Music City Center. And I think at the end of the day that the vitality and the stability of our neighborhoods has to be just as important as a vibrant downtown. And so I think I bring that perspective to the table. I think Nashville is a great city. We certainly have some challenges, most of which we've discussed this morning, but also think the solutions for those challenges are within reach. Colin Powell has a great quote that says, all great leaders are almost always great simplifiers. They have the ability to cut through argument, debate, and doubt and offer a solution that everybody can understand. I think we're close to that. I think we're close to those solutions. So to your viewers, to the extent that you agree with me that Nashville is a great city, that perspective and experience is important, and that you believe those solutions are within our reach, I would ask you to help me not just the next 28 days, but the next 4 years. I'm Charles Robert Bone. I'd be honored to have your vote.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And thank you to our viewers. Keep up on Tennessean.com. We have one more interview, and you can catch replays on Tennessean.com.